months since Colorado legalized marijuana, business has been booming. That state has taken in millions of dollars in revenue from marijuana sales, while Americans from all over the country are heading to Colorado to get their hands on the green stuff. But pot tourism isn't the only reason why Americans are flocking to Colorado. A growing number of families from all over the country are deciding to uproot their lives and move to the Centennial State in hopes of getting medical marijuana treatment for their children, who are suffering from a variety of severe disabilities and illnesses. Like the Lyles family, who recently moved from Ohio to Colorado to access the medicine they need for their daughter Jordan, who suffers from Dravet syndrome, a severe form of epilepsy. As soon as her mother learned about the benefits marijuana could have on her daughter's condition, she decided to pick up and move.
My husband got home that night and I said, "I've got something to tell you. We're moving." And he's like, "When?" And I said, "Now."
And families will continue to flock to Colorado and other states where medical and recreational marijuana is legal. So what can lawmakers across the country learn from the Colorado experience in marijuana legalization? And how far away are we from national marijuana legalization? Joining me now for more on that is David Sirota, staff writer with PandoDaily. Hey, David, great to see you again.
Hey, Tom. Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, and I should add, you're the nationally syndicated columnist and author of the book Back to Our Future. So, first of all, in your most recent article over at PandoDaily, which is increasingly becoming one of my go-to sites, by the way, it's a great website. You revisit some of the straw men that are being thrown out about marijuana legalization and knock them down. You want to run through that?
Sure. Typically, you hear from folks that want to continue prohibition of marijuana that prohibition means there will be no marijuana in society or available. And the problem with that argument has always been that a prohibitionist policy doesn't necessarily prevent a supply of what you're trying to prohibit from being in the market. The federal government itself says that marijuana is effectively, quote, universally available to 12th graders in the United States. So this is a debate over legalizing marijuana is not a debate over whether marijuana should be available on the market. It is whether we prohibit it or not. The real question has always been whether, if it's going to be available, whether we want it to be properly regulated and taxed. And here in Colorado, the argument was made during the campaign for the ballot initiative to legalize marijuana. The argument was made that we would rather have it be out on an open market, a regulated market, a market with all sorts of rules that can be enforced, rather than having marijuana continue to be on a black market.
So how's it worked out?
Well, so far it's worked out pretty well in the sense that there hasn't been much of a, what you might call a societal change or really a cultural change. Marijuana, as I said, is still, quote, universally available, as the federal government says, but it is far more regulated. You can get recreational or medicinal at state and locally licensed facilities. The thinking there is that we don't anymore have a problem, or at least as huge a problem as we had with unregulated alcohol, which there was plenty of unregulated alcohol during Prohibition. Now it is more out in the open but under regulation, and the thinking is that actually makes the society here in Colorado a lot safer.
So prior to legalization in Colorado, who were the major players opposing legalization?
Well, you've had the cultural conservatives. The religious right has opposed marijuana legalization. You certainly had the alcohol industry has, in states across the country, has contributed to the campaigns against legalization. You've got the Democratic Party's political establishment, certainly the Republican Party political establishment, although certainly there are some liberals and some libertarians who have supported legalization, but the establishments of both parties have really led the charge in trying to block this. Here, that includes Governor John Hickenlooper, who happens to be himself a beer brewer. And the craziest situation that we have here in Colorado is that you have a guy who made millions of dollars, his own personal fortune, selling alcohol to the state, and he continues to, as governor, promote the idea of drinking alcohol, a much more toxic substance than marijuana, and yet this same person who's pushing this is running around saying he's worried about the societal harm and health effects of a much safer product, scientifically, as we know, that's marijuana.
Is he still saying that?
Oh, yeah, he's still saying that he didn't support the ballot initiative. He's still very much worried about it. He wants to potentially regulate it out of existence. And again, this week, I'll give you an example. I mean, he's made comments about downplaying or denigrating marijuana legalization, and yet he's also made headlines installing beer taps in the Colorado governor's mansion to kick off Craft Beer Week. Now, look, I drink craft beer. I like craft beer. But the point here is that you can't be running around the state, or at least you shouldn't be able to be running around the state, saying that people should drink alcohol, which is much more toxic than marijuana, and then turn around and say that you're really worried about the health impacts of marijuana, a much safer product.
Yeah, maybe somebody should invite him into a partnership in one of the dispensaries.
Well, here's the thing. I think we're moving into a situation now here in Colorado where the small dispensaries are becoming more and more professionalized. You're going to see bigger and bigger players come into the marijuana market. I think you're going to see, essentially what you're going to see, I think, is Colorado destigmatize the idea of legalization for other states, effectively saying to other states, this isn't such a big deal. I mean, a lot of people called me up, Tom, and said, how big a deal is this? How much has it changed everything there? My answer is, it hasn't changed very much here for the average person. It's just better regulated and better controlled.
Yeah. Well, so good news, I guess. Last time you were on this program, you broke some startling news about the public broadcasting system, PBS, and the funding for a documentary they were planning to run on pensions in America. Now I hear you're reporting that the NewsHour is funded by a right-wing billionaire? Really?
That's right. It's funded and actually owned, majority owned by John Malone, who's the head of Liberty Media. John Malone also on the board of the Cato Institute. We broke the story at Pando that there is a transfer of ownership deal being worked out between PBS's Washington, D.C. station and Liberty Media to transfer ownership, I guess, effectively back to PBS. A lot of people didn't know that John Malone owns the NewsHour. But here's the thing. After our original story about the funding for that pension series that you mentioned, PBS promised to be transparent about these kinds of financial dealings. Well, when we asked PBS and WETA, the station involved, for details of the financial arrangements between the NewsHour and Liberty Media, they have categorically refused to provide any details to us, any contractual documents to us, even though it is a taxpayer-funded entity. We asked them, for instance, how much taxpayer money is going straight into the coffers of Liberty Media. There was no answer.
How does a right-wing billionaire end up owning the flagship show on public broadcasting in the first place?
Well, it's a very good question, and the answer that we've come to is that PBS member stations contract out with independent producers for various content. This happens to be, as you say, the flagship program of PBS. Lots of people think that means it must be owned by PBS, but what happened in the mid-1990s is that John Malone essentially bought the production house that produces NewsHour, and there have been questions raised by watchdog groups about whether he has had any editorial control. Now, the NewsHour staff says that he has no editorial control. When we asked for documentation contractually guaranteeing that he would be kept out of news decisions, again, we were rejected. We were rejected even though this is ostensibly a taxpayer-funded entity.